depend on government for, and we are standing on guard for those things, despite the trickery and the maliciousness demonstrated by the official opposition.
Give us too much credit.
They joke, Mr. Speaker. They joke about these things. They joke about these things. You know why they joke about these things? It's all part of the plan. It's just a big joke for these Conservatives on the other side of the House. All this chaos and dysfunction that they bring here on a daily basis by preventing us from voting on serious matters that Canadians are looking to us to provide. That is just a part of the long list of investments where the Conservatives showed their true colors, Mr. Speaker. They voted no over and over and over again. Monsieur le Président, les
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have shown us who they really are, with the unfortunate consequence of creating a voting marathon that lasted 30 hours straight. What does this mean? MPs, their staff, and House employees had to work through the night. Why? To satisfy the petulance of the Conservative leader. This attitude was not only childish and politically irresponsible, it also endangered the health of many people who frequent these corridors. This cannot happen again. Our motion proposes that in the future, if a new voting marathon were to take place, it would proceed as follows. Voting could take place throughout the day and even late into the evening, but as soon as midnight strikes, voting must stop. MPs and staff should then have time for a health break lasting several hours. They should be allowed to sleep, which is perfectly reasonable because we are sending out billions of dollars to support Canadians. And then at 9 a.m., the House would reconvene its work and votes would continue. This way, if the Conservatives want to provoke another voting marathon, they won't be stopped in their partisan tracks, but it'll simply take longer. And the health of MPs and others who work here will not be put at risk. I find it hard to understand why the Conservatives would oppose this proposal. We need to put politics aside and recognize that the personal health of each and every one of us here in this chamber comes before partisan gain. Mr. Speaker, this motion is intended to better make this democratic place function.
Work better, to make this place more productive, and to allow members from all sides of this House to vote, as we are sent here to do, in the most democratic of ways, on things that we feel are important for the people that we represent. C'est pour ça, Monsieur le Président.
And that is why, Mr. Speaker, that I conclude my remarks, and I'll be happy to answer any questions my colleagues may have. Thank you.
Question et commentaire.
Questions and comments.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I'd argue it's that type of revisionist history, which is why the Liberal polling numbers are so flaccid. Listen, debate on legislation is why we're here. We're here to hold the government to account, and we're not here to make Liberals' cabinet ministers easier because they've failed to work plan. For example, Supreme Court rulings like MAID have been introduced, responses to them have been introduced into the House at the last minute, and then the government attempts to ram these things through without intervention, and that's because of their failure to work plan. And it's often the Liberals that are holding up legislation, Mr. Speaker. It's often them who are delaying Parliament. For example, last week, Liberal on the Government Operations Committee filibustered to block a Conservative motion to compel the owners of GC Strategies, a company at the centre of the Arrive scam debacle, to be questioned by parliamentarians. So my question is this. Is the real reason the Liberals that they're putting this motion forward is because their cabinet has failed to work plan due to the legions of scandals that this government is facing?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here's what I can say. Every time we bring a bill into this House and we put it, bring it for debate for second reading, it doesn't really matter what it is. Yeah. It could be called the Sky is Blue Act, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives would pose dilatory motions, and for Canadians who are watching this, what they do is they say, let's concur in some committee report from 6 months ago that no one has talked about since. Let's put aimless and pointless points of privilege on the floor, things that prevent us from getting to the work that we have to do. And that member voted for childcare. Well, I would put it to her right now. Will she go to her leader and ask that we be able to put Bill C-35 to a vote today at all stages so that Albertans can have access to the childcare they deserve?
Question commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, New Democratic Party MPs come to this House of Commons to work. And as you've seen, Mr. Speaker, for pharmacare, for dental care, for anti-scab legislation, for the grocery rebate, fighting back against food price gouging with the enhancements to the Competition Act, anti-scab legislation, supports for clean energy, all of those things, and affordable housing as well, have come through the NDP, being the effective opposition in the House, pushing the government to simply put in place programs that will actually help people. Now, as you know, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have done the opposite of that and voted instead to gut healthcare funding, housing, even things like CBSA and prisons, correctional services. They have voted to cut all of those things. What this motion represents is working smarter and working harder, having evening sessions that the NDP has long been a proponent of, but stopping the kind of all-night voting marathons that have led to health issues with a number of members of Parliament and with staff. And so the NDP will be supporting this motion. My simple question to the Government House Leader is why the Conservatives have been so obstructionist during the course of this Parliament.
Honourable Government House Leader.
I thank the member for that question, my friend from the New Democratic Party. You know, he asks why Conservatives have done this, and we see this around the world, Mr. Speaker. They think that by coming in and making these places, these precious chambers of democracy, so toxic, so laden with invective, so dripping with insult.
Your leader elbowed a woman in the chest. Do you want to talk about toxic?
So laden and dripping with insult and invective that Canadians will turn away, that Canadians will simply say, I don't want any part of any of that. And that's how they come to suppress voting. That's how they try and get Canadians disillusioned with their politics rather than interested in the results that politics and government can have on their daily life. My friend from New Westminster Burnaby outlines many of them. Dental care, lower grocery prices, child care, Mr. Speaker. All of these things that we work in earnest every day to pass through this House in a democratic way, but which the Conservatives spend all of their time trying to tie up in procedure and nonsense.
Commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Greens, like the NDP, are certainly here to work, happy to stay late, to move forward with the business of Canadians and their priorities. I'd like to put to the House Leader just two examples of those that with all this extra time, he knows, as you do, Mr. Speaker, that Canadians with disabilities across the country continue to live in legislated poverty. This government has committed to the Canada Disability Benefit for many, many years. With this extra time, does that mean that we're going to see the Canada Disability Benefit funded with expediency? Secondly, he spoke about protecting our environment from the catastrophic effect of climate change. He likely knows that for folks in Ontario, as a climate no-brainer starting point is to give folks an incentive to retrofit their homes. There's a program that's been in place for 20 years. It's called the Greener Homes Grant. In Ontario, Ontarians are no longer eligible to even apply for it as of right now. Does this mean that as a result of the extra time we're going to have here, we're going to move forward with significant measures to address the climate crisis, replenishing and expanding the Greener Homes Grant being an example of that?
Honourable Leader en Chambre de Gouvernement.
Mr. Speaker, debating things that help and have positive impacts for Canadians wherever they may live, in Ontario or elsewhere, on climate change for disabled Canadians or any other matter, is precisely why we are making this place more open for debate. We can have greater productivity, debate more things, pass more measures that will help everyday Canadians.
Maltire, questions and comments. I'm going to have the honourable member, Leonard of the DP.
The honourable member for Longueuil Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question for my colleague. Is this motion not an admission of failure in my colleague's speech? He attacked everyone, saying if we can't tackle our issues, it's because of the opposition. If we can't tackle Canada's worst problems, it's because of the opposition. The government is the government, and they should govern. They even have a significant ally that always supports them, even when it's against their best interests. So we have a government that can't tackle issues. There's a housing crisis. There's a climate crisis. There's a language crisis. This morning they say, oh, it's the Conservatives' fault. It's the opposition's fault. Isn't that just an admission of failure in this motion, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House. Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend my colleague for his opposition's constructive work. Sometimes they support us, sometimes they do not. What they don't do, and what I'm reproaching of them, what I reproach are dilatory tactics. What causes mere chaos here? Unproductive chaos, which stops people from being able to put forward their points of view. It stops people from being able to debate well. We need to debate here, yes, and we have to vote upon them, yes. And Mr. Speaker, we defend our positions and we accept our positions, but this motion is here so that all members in this House can debate, so that this whole of democracy functions well.
Waterloo.
Mr. Speaker, I do appreciate the fact that we're having this debate and this discussion today, and I do believe that every member of Parliament is elected to represent their constituents, and I am really honoured and privileged to represent the good people of the riding of Waterloo. And what I've noticed, whether in this House or within committees, that each party actually does have priorities. They have areas of focus, and whether it's the Bloc, whether it's the NDP, whether it's the Greens, whether it's the Independents, there are areas of interest in which they're trying to work with a government to say, how do we deliver for our constituents? And I do echo the comments of the government House Leader that there is one party who believes that the role of the official opposition is to always oppose rather than actually constructively work with. And they find it funny, and that's fine. And you'll notice that when there's certain people speaking in this House, the volume in the House is a lot louder than when other people are speaking. And I think when it comes to this motion, I think what's important for us to actually focus on is how do we deliver for Canadians? The Leader of the official opposition lives in government-funded housing. Every member of Parliament is paid by the public purse. So how do we ensure that we're delivering for Canadians? Because government does have a role to play, and I would like to hear the government House Leader's comments on how this motion actually might be able to make us more productive if members of Parliament actually chose to come here to work constructively together rather than blindly oppose. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We are out of time, and allow the Honourable Government House Leader to respond.
Well, that's a point that makes itself. We are sent here, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we get results for our constituents, that we participate positively in debates, that we put forward proposals and bills that help the people we represent. And when we are blocked from doing that systematically by an opposition that consistently puts up procedural roadblocks to that, then of course the government, any responsible government, has to act in the way that we are doing today.
Resuming debate, the Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Common sense Conservatives are focused on axing the tax, building the homes, fixing the budget, and stopping the crime. Well, this Liberal Prime Minister proves day in and day out that he's not worth the cost or the corruption. And what we're seeing today is a perfect example of how the government is focused on the wrong things. While Conservatives are putting forward tangible and practical measures that will lower costs, bring interest rates down, get home